Hey guys, we are continuing our reading of 5 love languages. We're going to be doing chapters 9 and 10 today. So chapter 9 is discovering your primary love language. Discovering the primary love language of your spouse is essential if you are to keep their emotional love tank full. But first, make sure you know your own love language. Having heard the 5 emotional love languages, words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch, some individuals will know instantly their own primary love language and that of their spouse. For others, it will not be that easy. Some are like Marcus, who, after hearing the 5 emotional love languages, said to me, I don't know, it seems that 2 of those are just about equal for me. Which 2? I inquired. Physical touch and words of affirmation, he responded. By physical touch, what do you mean? Well, mainly sex, Marcus replied. I probed a little further, asking, do you enjoy your wife running her hands through your hair, or giving you a back rub, or holding hands or kissing and hugging you at times when you are not having sexual intercourse? Those things are fine, said Marcus. I'm not going to turn them down, but the main thing is sexual intercourse. That's when I know that she really loves me. Leaving the subject of physical touch for a moment, I turned to affirming words and asked, when you say that words of affirmation are also important, what kinds of statements do you find most helpful? Almost anything, if it is positive, Marcus replied. When she tells me how good I look, how smart I am, what a hard worker I am, when she expresses her appreciation for the things I do around the house, when she makes positive comments about my taking time with the children, when she tells me she loves me, all of those things really mean a lot to me. Did you receive those kinds of comments from your parents when you were growing up? Not very often, he said. Most of what I got from my parents were critical or demanding words. I guess that's why I appreciated Alicia so much in the first place, because she gave me words of affirmation. Let me ask you this. If Alicia were meeting your sexual needs, that is, if you were having quality sexual intercourse as often as you desire, but she was giving you negative words, making critical remarks, sometimes putting you down in front of others, do you think you would feel loved by her? I don't think so, he replied. I think I would feel betrayed and deeply hurt. I think I would be depressed. Marcus, I said, I think we have just discovered that your primary love language is words of affirmation. Sexual intercourse is extremely important to you and to your sense of intimacy with Alicia, but her words of affirmation are more important to you emotionally. If she in fact verbally critical of you all the time and puts you down in front of other people, the time may come when you would no longer desire to have sexual intercourse with her because she would be a source of deep pain to you. Marcus had made the mistake common to many men, assuming that physical touch is their primary love language because they desire sexual intercourse so intensely. For the male, sexual desire is physically based. That is, the desire for sexual intercourse is stimulated by the buildup of sperm cells and seminal fluid in the seminal vessels. When the seminal vessels are full, there is a physical push for release. Thus, the male's desire for sexual intercourse has a physical root. For the female, sexual desire is far more influenced by her emotions. If she feels loved and admired and appreciated by her husband, then she has a desire to be physically intimate with him. But without the emotional closeness, she may have little physical desire. Her biological sexual drive is closely tied to her emotional need for love. Because the male is physically pushed to have sexual release on a somewhat regular basis, he may automatically assume that this is his primary love language. But if he does not enjoy physical touch at other times and in non-sexual ways, it may not be his love language at all. Sexual desire is quite different from his emotional need to feel loved. That doesn't mean that sexual intercourse is unimportant to him. It is extremely important, but sexual intercourse alone will not meet his need to feel loved. His wife must speak his primary emotional love language as well. When, in fact, his wife speaks his primary love language and his emotional love tank is full, and he speaks her primary love language and her emotional tank is full, the sexual aspect of the relationship will take care of itself. Most sexual problems in marriage have little to do with physical technique, but everything to do with meeting emotional needs. After further conversation and reflection, Marcus said, I think you're right. Words of affirmation is definitely my primary love language. When she has been cutting and critical of me verbally, I tend to withdraw from her sexually and fantasize about other women. But when she tells me how much she appreciates me and admires me, my natural sexual desires are turned toward her. Marcus had made a significant discovery in our brief conversation. How do you know? What is your primary love language? What makes you feel most loved by your spouse? What do you desire above all else? If the answer to those questions does not leap to your mind immediately, perhaps it will help to look at the negative use of love languages. What does your spouse do or say or fail to do or say that hurts you deeply? If, for example, your deepest pain is the critical, judgmental words of your spouse, then perhaps your love language is words of affirmation. If your primary love language is words of affirmation, if your primary love language is used negatively by your spouse, that is, he does the opposite, it will hurt you more deeply than it would hurt someone else, because not only is he neglecting to speak your primary love language, he is actually using the language as a knife to your heart. I remember Mary in Kitchener, Ontario, who said, Dr. Chapman, what hurts me the most is that Ron never lifts a hand to help me around the house. He watches television while I do all the work. I don't understand how he could do that if he really loved me. Mary's deepest hurt, mainly that Ron not help her do things around the house, was the clue to her primary love language, acts of service. If it grieves you deeply that your spouse seldom gives you a gift for any occasion, then perhaps your primary love language is receiving gifts. If your deepest hurt is that your spouse seldom gives you quality time, then that is your primary love language. Another approach to discovering your primary love language is to look back over your marriage and ask, what have I most oft requested of my spouse? Whatever you have most requested is probably in keeping with your primary love language. Those requests have probably been interrupted by your spouse as nagging. They have been, in fact, your efforts to secure emotional love from your spouse. Elizabeth, who lived in Marysville, Indiana, used that approach in discovering her primary love language. She said to me at the conclusion of a seminar session, whenever I look back over the last 10 years of my marriage and ask myself what I've most requested of Peter, my love language becomes obvious. I've requested quality time most often. Over and over again, I've asked him if we could go on a picnic, take a weekend together, shut the TV off for just an hour and talk with each other, take a walk together, and on and on. I have felt neglected and unloved because seldom did he ever respond to my requests. He gave me nice gifts for my birthday and special occasions and wondered why I was not excited about them. During your seminar, she continued, the lights came on for both of us. During the break, my husband apologized for being so dense through the years and so resistant to my requests. He has promised me that things will be different in the future, and I believe they will. Another way to discover your primary love language is to examine what you do or say to express love to your spouse. Chances are what you are doing for her is what you wish she would do for you. If you are constantly doing acts of service for your spouse, perhaps, although not always, that is your love language. If words of affirmation speak love to you, chances are you will use them in speaking love to your spouse. Thus, you may discover your own language by asking, how do I consciously express my love to my spouse? But remember, that approach is only a possible clue to your love language. It is not an absolute indicator. For example, the husband who learned from his father to express love to his wife by giving her nice gifts expresses his love to his wife by doing what his father did. Yet receiving gifts is not his primary love language. He is simply doing what he was trained to do by his father. I have suggested 3 ways to discover your own love language, primary love language. What does your spouse do or fail to do that hurts you most deeply? The opposite of what hurts you most is probably your love language. What have you most often requested of your spouse? The thing you have most often requested is likely the thing that would make you feel most loved. In what way do you regularly express love to your spouse? Your method of expressing love may be an indication that would also make you feel loved. Using those 3 approaches will probably enable you to determine your primary love language. If 2 languages seem to be equal for you, that is, both speak loudly to you, then perhaps you are bilingual. If so, you make it easier on your spouse. Now he or she has 2 choices, either of which will strongly communicate love to you. You may also wish to take the 5 love languages profile found on pages 191 to 201. Discuss the results with your spouse. 2 kinds of people may have difficulty discovering their primary love language. The first is the individual whose emotional love tank has been full for a long time. Her spouse has expressed love in many ways, and she is not certain which of those ways makes her feel most loved. She simply knows that she is loved. The second is the individual whose love tank has been empty for so long that he doesn't remember what makes him feel loved. In either case, go back to the experience of falling in love yourself, what did I like about my spouse in those days? What did he do or say that made me desire to be with him? If you can conjure up those memories, it will give you some idea of your primary love language. Another approach will be to ask yourself, what would be an ideal spouse to me? If I could have the perfect mate, what would she be like? Your picture of a perfect mate should give you some idea of your primary love language. Having said all of that, let me suggest that you spend some time writing down what you think is your primary love language. Then list the other 4 in order of importance. Also write down what you think is the primary love language of your spouse. You may also list the other 4 in order of importance if you wish. Sit down with your spouse and discuss what you guess to be his or her primary love language. Then tell each other what you consider to be your own primary love language. Once you have shared that information, I suggest that you play the following game 3 times a week for 3 weeks. The game is called Tank Check, and it is played like this. When you come home, one of you says to the other, on a scale of 0 to 10, how is your love tank tonight? 0 means empty, and 10 means I'm full of love and can't handle anymore. You give a reading on your emotional love tank 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, indicating how full it is. Your spouse says, what could I do to help fill it? Then you make a suggestion, something you would like your spouse to do or say that evening. To be the best of his ability, he will respond to your request. Then you ask your spouse the same questions in the reverse order so that both of you have the opportunity to do a reading on your love tank and to make a suggestion toward filling it. If you play the game for 3 weeks, you will be hooked on it, and it can be a playful way of simulating love expressions in your marriage. One husband said to me, I don't like that love tank game. I played it with my wife. I came home and said to her, on a scale of 0 to 10, how's your love tank tonight? She said about 7. I asked, what could I do to help fill it? She said, the greatest thing you could do for me tonight is to do the laundry. I said, love and laundry? I don't get it. I said, that's the problem. Perhaps you don't understand your wife's love language. What's your primary love language? Without hesitation, he said, physical touch, and especially the sexual part of the marriage. Listen to me carefully. I said, the love you feel when your wife expresses love by physical touch is the same love your wife feels when you do the laundry. Bring on the laundry, he shouted. I'll wash the clothes every night if it makes her feel that good. Incidentally, if you have still not discovered your primary love language, keep records on the tank check game. When your spouse says, what could I do to help fill your tank? Your suggestions will likely cluster around your primary love language. You may request things from all 5 love languages, but you will have more requests centering on your primary love language. Perhaps some of you are saying in your minds what one couple said to me in Zion, Illinois. Dr. Chapman, all that sounds fine and wonderful, but what if the love language of your spouse is something that just doesn't come naturally for you? I'll discuss my answer in chapter 10. Your turn. Do you think by now you have a good sense of what your spouse's love language is? How about them for you? What more could you do to explore this? If your love tank is completely empty or very full, whether you know your love language or not, play the tank check game over the next month. Ask for a reading from 0 to 10, 3 evenings a week, and then take the suggestions of your spouse to raise that number for him or her. If your spouse is at a 10, consistently, you can pat yourself on the back, but don't stop loving. Chapter 10, Love is a Choice. How can we speak each other's love language when we are full of hurt, anger, and resentment over past failures? The answer to that question lies in the essential nature of our humanity. We are creatures of choice. That means that we have the capacity to make poor choices, which all of us have done. We have spoken critical words, and we have done hurtful things. We are not proud of those choices, although they may have seemed justified at the moment. Poor choices in the past don't mean that we must make them in the future. Instead, we can say, I'm sorry, I know I have hurt you, but I would like to make the future different. I would like to love you in your language. I would like to meet your needs. I have seen marriages rescued from the brink of divorce when couples make a choice to love. Love doesn't erase the past, but it makes the future different. When we choose active expressions of love in the primary love language of our spouse, we create an emotional climate where we can deal with our past conflicts and failures. I just don't love her anymore. Brent was in my office, stone-faced and seemingly unfeeling. He had come not by his own initiative, but at my request. A week earlier, his wife, Becky, had been sitting in the same chair weeping. Between her outbursts of tears, she managed to verbalize that Brent had told her that he no longer loved her and that he was leaving. She was devastated. When she regained her composure, she said, We have both worked so hard the last 2 or 3 years. I knew that we were not spending so much time together as we used to, but I thought we were working for a common goal. I cannot believe what he is saying. He has always been such a kind and caring person. He is such a good father to our children." She continued, "How could he do this to us?" I listened as she described their 12 years of marriage. It was a story I had heard many times before. They had an exciting courtship, got married at the height of the in-love experience, had the typical adjustments in the early days of marriage, and pursued the American dream. In due time, they came down off the emotional high of the in-love experience, but did not learn to speak each other's love languages sufficiently. She had lived with a love tank only half full for the last several years, but she had received enough expressions of love to make her think that everything was okay. However, his love tank was empty. I told Becky that I would see if Brent would talk with me. I told Brent on the phone, "As you know, Becky came to see me and told me about her struggle with what is happening in the marriage. I want to help her, but in order to do so, I need to know what you are thinking." He agreed readily, and now he sat in my office. His outward appearance was in stark contrast to Becky's. She had been weeping copiously, but he was stoic. I had the impression, however, that his tears had been shed weeks or perhaps months before, and that it had been an inward weeping. The story Brent told confirmed my hunch. "I just don't love her anymore," he said. "I haven't loved her for a long time. I don't want to hurt her, but we are not close. Our relationship has become empty. I don't enjoy being with her anymore. I don't know what happened. I wish it were different, but I don't have any feelings for her." Brent was thinking and feeling what hundreds of thousands of husbands have thought and felt through the years. It's the "I don't love her anymore" mindset that gives men the emotional freedom to seek love with someone else. The same is true for wives who use the same excuse. I sympathize with Brent. I have been there. Thousands of husbands and wives have been there, emotionally empty, wanting to do the right thing, not wanting to hurt anyone, but being pushed by their emotional need to seek love outside the marriage. Fortunately, I had discovered in the earlier years of my own marriage the difference between the in-love experience and the emotional need to feel loved. Most in our society have not yet learned that difference. The in-love experience that we discussed in Chapter 3 is on the level of instinct. It is not premeditated. It simply happens in the normal context of male-female relationships. It can be fostered or quenched, but it does not arise by conscious choice. It is short-lived, usually 2 years or less, and seems to serve for humankind the same function as the mating call of the Canada goose. The in-love experience temporarily meets one's emotional need for love. It gives the feeling that someone cares, that someone admires us and appreciates us. Our emotions soar with the thought that another person sees us as number one, that he or she is willing to devote time and energies exclusively to our relationship. For a brief period, however long it lasts, our emotional need for love is met. Our tank is full. We can conquer the world. Nothing is impossible for many individuals. It is the first time they have ever lived with a full emotional tank, and the feeling is euphoric. In time, however, we come down from the natural high back to the real world. If our spouse has learned to speak our primary love language, our need for love will continue to be satisfied. If, on the other hand, he or she does not speak our love language, our tank will slowly drain, and we will no longer feel loved. Meeting that need in our one spouse is definitely a choice. If I learn the emotional love language of my spouse and speak it frequently, she will continue to feel loved. When she comes down from the obsession of the in-love experience, she will hardly even miss it because her emotional love tank will continue to be filled. However, if I have not learned her primary love language or have chosen not to speak it, when she descends from the emotional high, she will have the natural yearnings of unmet emotional needs. After some years of living with an empty tank, she will likely fall in love with someone else, and the cycle will begin again. Meeting my wife's need for love is a choice I make each day. If I know her primary love language and choose to speak it, her deepest emotional needs will be met and she will feel secure in my love. If she does the same for me, my emotional needs are met and both of us live with a full in a state of emotional contentment. Both of us will give our creative energies to many wholesome projects outside the marriage while we continue to keep our marriage exciting and growing. With all that in mind, I looked back at the deadpan face of Brent and wondered if I could help him. I knew in my heart that he was probably already involved with another in-love experience. I wondered if it was in the beginning stages or at its height. Few men suffering from an empty emotional love tank leave their marriage until they have prospects of meeting that need somewhere else. Brent was honest and revealed that he had been in love with someone else for several months. He had hoped that the feelings would go away and that he could work things out with his wife, but things at home had gotten worse, and his love for the other woman had increased. He could not imagine living without his new lover. I sympathized with Brent in his dilemma. He sincerely did not want to hurt his wife or his children, but at the same time, he felt he deserved a life of happiness. I told him the dismal statistics on second marriages. He was surprised to hear that, but was certain that he would beat the odds. I told him about the research on the effects of divorce on children, but he was convinced that he would continue to be a father to his children and that they would get over the trauma of the divorce. I talked to Brent about the issues in this book and explained the differences between the experience of falling in love and the deep emotional need to feel loved. I explained the 5 love languages and challenged him to give his marriage another chance. All the while, I knew that my intellectual and reasoned approach to marriage compared to the emotional high that he was experiencing was like pitting a BB gun against an automatic weapon. He expressed appreciation for my concern and asked that I do everything possible to help Becky, but he declared that he saw no hope for the marriage. 1 month later, I received a call from Brent. He indicated that he would like to talk with me again. This time, when he entered my office, he was noticeably disturbed. He was not the calm, cool man I had seen before. His liver had begun to come down from the emotional high, and she was observing things in Brent that she did not like. She was withdrawing from the relationship, and he was crushed. Tears came to his eyes as he told me how much she meant to him and how unbearable it was to experience her rejection. I listened for an hour before Brent ever asked for my advice. I told him how sympathetic I was to his pain and indicated that what he was experiencing was the natural emotional grief from a loss and that the grief would not go away overnight. I explained, however, that the experience was inevitable. I reminded him of the temporary nature of the in-love experience, that sooner or later we always come down from the high to the real world. Some fall out of love before they get married, others after they get married. He agreed that it was better now than later. After a while, I suggested that perhaps the crisis was a good time for him and his wife to get some marriage counseling. I reminded him that true, long-lasting emotional love is a choice and that emotional love could be reborn in his marriage if he and his wife learned to love each other in the right love languages. He agreed to marriage counseling, and 9 months later, Brent and Becky left my office with a reborn marriage. When I saw Brent 3 years later, he told me what a wonderful marriage he had and thanked me for helping him at a crucial time in his life. He told me that the grief over losing the other lover had been gone for more than 2 years. He smiled and said, "My tank has never been so full, and Becky is the happiest woman you are ever going to meet." Fortunately, Brent was the benefactor of what I call the disequilibrium of the in-love experience. That is, almost never do 2 people fall in love on the same day, and almost never do they fall out of love on the same day. You don't have to be a social scientist to discover that truth. Just listen to country and western songs. Brent's lover happened to have fallen out of love at an opportune time. Actions and emotions. In the 9 months that I counseled Brent and Becky, we worked through numerous conflicts that they had never resolved before. But the key to the rebirth of their marriage was discovering each other's primary love language and choosing to speak it frequently. What if the love language of your spouse is something that doesn't come naturally for you? I'm often asked this question at my marriage seminars, and my answer is so. My wife's love language is acts of service. One of the things I do for her regularly as an act of love is to vacuum the floors. Do you think that vacuuming floors comes naturally for me? My mother used to make me vacuum all through junior high and high school. I couldn't go play ball on Saturday until I finished vacuuming the entire house. In those days, I said to myself, when I get out of here, one thing I am not going to do, I'm not going to vacuum houses. I'll get myself a wife to do that, but I vacuum our house now, and I vacuum it regularly. And there is only one reason I vacuum our house: love. You couldn't pay me enough to vacuum a house, but I do it for love. You see, when an action doesn't come naturally to you, it is a greater expression of love. My wife knows that when I vacuum the house, it is nothing but 100% pure, unadulterated love, and I get credit for the whole thing. Someone says, but Dr. Chapman, that's different. I know that my spouse's love language is physical touch, and I am not a toucher. I never saw my mother and father hug each other. They never hugged me. I'm just not a toucher. What am I going to do? Do you have two hands? Can you put them together? Now imagine that you have your spouse in the middle and pull him or her towards you. I'll bet that if you hug your spouse 3,000 times, it will begin to feel more comfortable. But ultimately, comfort is not the issue. We are talking about love, and love is something you do for someone else, not something you do for yourself. Most of us do many things each day that do not come naturally for us. For some of us, that is getting out of bed in the morning. We do go against our feelings and get out of bed. Why? Because we believe there is something worthwhile to do that day. And normally, before the day is over, we feel good about having gotten up. Our actions precede our emotions. The same is true with love. We discover the primary love language of our spouse and we choose to speak it whether or not it is natural for us. We are not claiming to have warm, excited feelings. We are simply choosing to do it for his or her benefit. We want to meet our spouse's emotional need and we reach out to speak his love language. In so doing, his emotional love tank is filled, and chances are he will reciprocate and speak our language. When he does, our emotions return and our love tank begins to fill. Love is a choice, and either partner can start the process today. Your turn. A key thought here is the idea of speaking our mate's love language, whether or not it is natural for us. Why do you think this is so fundamental to a healthy marriage? Okay, guys, we will do chapter 11 and probably 12 next time. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.